dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Today, I am sharing the audio of an online webinar I attended in April for Oregon Wine Month. There will be more of these episodes to follow, so stay tuned. I have fallen in love with Oregon wines. So many wineries have captured the beautiful expressions of the varieties they grow. But today's conversation is about one that I am not too familiar with, sparkling wines in Oregon. I believe that I have only had one or two, so this was an exciting topic. You can watch the video on Oregon Wine Board's YouTube channel. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. Did you know you can do it right now while you're listening? New ratings and reviews are how the algorithms decide which podcast they recommend to others, and if you love the podcast, other wine lovers will too. So don't forget to add your email address on the website to keep up with all things exploring the wine glass. Slancha.
Oh, no, never let you go.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Spanish wine scholar, sommelier service, Champagne and Côte d'Aron specialist, and a WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. Stay in the know about all things wine by visiting my website, exploringthewineglass.com. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
We're excited to have everybody joining us and appreciate your time. My name is David DeWitt. I run trade relations for the Oregon Wine Board. I'm joined today by Bree Stock, our Director of Education. This is, like I said, a series of 4 webinars that we'll be hosting leading up to Oregon Wine Month, which we celebrate every May. Today's topic is sparkling wine, which is pretty exciting. Oregon's really making big strides when it comes to sparkling wine. Obviously, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay thrive here, so we're well suited to make great products. Bree, please take it away.
Thanks, David. Thanks everyone for being here today. Excited to talk about a new subject, sparkling Oregon wine, which is having huge growth. So, which makes a lot of sense given that Oregon is generally a strong Pinot Noir producer, but also coming on very strong with Chardonnay as well, and also other styles of sparkling from other grape varieties as well. The rise of sparkling is certainly on trend with a lot of rosé, Blanc de Blanc, Blanc de Noir, and more complex styles of sparkling really starting to take off here in the US as well. And from a pretty small region, which is Oregon, we are only about 4% of the sparkling production in the US at the moment. Okay, so for those of you who have not been to Oregon, here is a map of our state. We are wedged in between Washington and California. So sitting north of California and just south of Washington, we are a incredibly temperate and maritime climate along the western edge of the state. So that's the majority of where most of the wine growing is happening in Oregon, is really wedged between those coastal Coast Range and Siskiyou Mountains, which help buffer the cool Pacific Ocean winds and big ocean storms that we do get here and have been present here for about the last 4 months. Really coming in, giving us a lot of cold, wet weather, which really helps to replenish our soils and helps us to dry farm as well. Much of Oregon is dry farmed, not requiring irrigation really until you start getting into the eastern parts of the state and the southern parts of the state, where the soils do get a little more alluvial and the elevations higher and further from the coast and less impacted by those Pacific Ocean cool coastal currents as well. Oregon now has 22 AVAs, so 22 American viticultural areas. That's been exciting developments as Oregon continues to really refine and define its growing areas. You know, the state's wine production is just around 60 years old at the moment. So we're really starting to see those second and third generations really start to really define and be able to communicate clearly the different attributes of each AVA, whether it be soils, elevation, the specific characteristics of the climate there, and really identifying which wine styles, grape varieties are really performing within the nested AVAs. The largest growing region for Oregon is the Willamette Valley in the north. You can see that Willamette Valley has 10 nested AVAs within it. Most of them are within the northwestern part of the AVA. And you'll see as we go into here, the Willamette Valley is a 3.5 million acre AVA. So it's quite a large span of the Willamette Valley watershed based around the Willamette Valley River. 3.5 million acres. It, you know, takes you a good 3 hours to get from north to south, from Portland down to Eugene, across that I-5 corridor, and even longer if you're traversing through the many hills and valleys of the AVAs on the western side of the state, where on the western side of the AVA, where the majority of those really well-defined and premium AVAs are located. It's exciting to see that even within the larger AVAs like Chehalem Mountains, we're further defining the pieces of land within those larger AVAs for really distinctive wine growing purposes. So Ribbon Ridge there obviously being a nice small AVA with alluvial soils. What have we got a question here? Aside from CG, shadows. There's only the 4 AVAs. So David, yeah, that's a good question. What shared AVAs does Oregon share with other states? There's really just, if I just go back to the slide beforehand. So the shared AVAs for Oregon are the Columbia River Gorge, the Columbia Valley, and Walla Walla here. So these 3 along the Columbia River, and then the 4th is the Snake River Valley, which we share with Idaho. So all of these are growing in vineyard production, and more producers are starting to seek out grapes from these AVAs, and not just within this area, but a lot from the Willamette Valley are now seeking out fruit from Walla Walla or the Rocks District of Milton Freewater or Columbia Gorge AVA, or even the Snake River Valley AVA as well. So really, you know, starting to explore the state a little more as well. So back to the Willamette Valley. Within the Willamette Valley, there are really 3 main dominant soil types. So you have the ancient marine sedimentary soils that were pushed to the surface when the tectonic plates collided and really brought Oregon out of the ocean millions of years ago. And then on top of those, you have the volcanic basalt soils, which formed as part of the Cascades and all of the other volcanoes and mountains really started really forming and spewing out a lot of really heavy lava and volcanic basalt. And then the low soils are really segmented on the northern part of the Willamette Valley, which is these low soils are coming down the Columbia River from Washington, and these are really the wind-blown basalt volcanics, very fine, very light, powdery soils, and it's really what's found in much of Washington's growing regions as well. As you can see, the Willamette Valley AVA is quite large with We do have one missing on here, actually. What is quite large, with the majority of the premium AVAs being in the Northwest. And so these are really actually where the valley is most hilled and most forested as well. So we start to get up off of the valley floor at where the AVAs start. So that's around 200 feet elevation, and they tend to go up to 1,000 feet in elevation. We are even pushing above that in some AVAs, and also as we move further into the Coast Range, seeking some cooler weather and more rainfall for dry grown vineyards. Especially suited to sparkling production is when we do go into those cool sites. So it's, you know, one foot hedging for the future in terms of where Pinot Noir can grow, being that it is a fairly thin-skinned grape variety and doesn't like a lot of heat. As the summers in Oregon get warmer and drier, folks are now starting to find vineyards that are in cooler environments as well. So moving higher into elevations around the 800 to 1,100 feet elevation, and really starting to benefit from those cooler winds at the higher elevations and the larger diurnal shifts that start to happen at those high elevations as well. Pinot Noir is 59% of Oregon's grape plantings. Most of it is found in the Willamette Valley, and it's still increasing in plantings. So the Willamette Valley has almost 90% Pinot Noir in terms of its production within the Willamette Valley. And then also in Southern Oregon, the Umpqua Valley and the Rogue Valleys, Pinot Noir is the dominant grape variety there as well. So it makes sense that Oregon is really starting to produce a lot more sparkling wines made from Pinot Noir and also Chardonnay. So as Chardonnay is growing in popularity, as we get better clones, we find more suitable sites, and as the style of Chardonnay that is appreciated across the US and the world really has moved towards a leaner, crisper, more minerally and salty style. The Chardonnay in Oregon has really started to find favor again in the fans of consumers and of critics as well. And these are really starting to spread a lot more plantings. So we have around 7% of Oregon's grapes are planted to Chardonnay. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but we don't have, you know, huge masses of other grape varieties either. So 7% is quite large. For instance, there's around 12% Pinot Gris, around 2% of Riesling, and you know, there are a host of other grape varieties. There's more than 80 grape varieties planted around the state of Oregon, but Pinot Noir is certainly the focus for red varieties, and Chardonnay is fast becoming a focus in whites, especially in the Willamette. A little bit of history for sparkling wine in Oregon. It may seem like a bit of a surprise that we haven't really touched on too much sparkling wine production in any of these seminars in the past, considering that Roland Soles, who founded Argyle Winery along with Brian Croser in 1987, was really the first to start producing really quite a substantial amount of sparkling wine in Oregon. He really was dedicated to making premium sparkling wine, and they're really known, Argyle, for their extended tirage. We'll talk about that a little bit as we move into the styles of wine that we have, of sparkling wine that we have here. So Roland came from Texas, but he'd worked around the world working in cool climate growing regions. And really in 1987, you know, viticulture and the major plantings that were starting to happen happen in the Willamette Valley were still quite young, and the climate was still quite very moderate at that point. And some of the higher elevation sites that Roland had access to were not always ripening to the level that he would have liked to make red wines from. And so it seemed like a natural progression for him to invest in making sparkling wines. And he really did with gusto. So Argyle is now one of the largest producers of sparkling wine in Oregon, and continues to grow and continues to be renowned around the US for the Blanc de Blanc styles and for their extended aged releases. So spending 10 years on their lees in bottle to give really developed creamy mouth feels. There's one question in here. Of the 80-ish varietals grown in the state, how much of that is Vitis vinifera? Most of it is Vitis vinifera, Brooke. There's very few hybrid varieties here in the state. We do find some in a couple of vineyards in the Willamette Valley and some up in Central Oregon, actually. But other than that, the majority of the 80 varieties that we're really talking about are Vitis vinifera vines. So just as more and more people have access to, foundation plant services and all of the vine varieties that they're bringing in, and as some of the nursery companies really work to partner with some of the universities in France and Spain, they're really bringing in some very high quality clonal material, and that's what people are tracking down and doing some research and finding what grows where in what site. There's a lot of terroir comparisons to northwestern Spain, given our climate and our proximity to the cold ocean. So there's really just a lot of imaginative winemakers, I'm sure, as you can imagine, and wine growers who are investing in seeing what other varieties can do here as well. So while Pinot Noir and Chardonnay continue to be the most planted, continuing en masse, big vineyard scales, there's many creative growers who are really playing around with a few other varieties and planting, acre blocks of new varieties around the place. Especially down in Southern Oregon as well. There's a real a huge movement for introducing new varieties in Southern Oregon as well. So back to Roland and his adventures in moving to Oregon to make wine, and discovering that a lot of his blocks, some at 1,000 feet elevation, like the Knudsen Vineyard in the Dundee Hills that was planted in 1972, that's really a very high elevation, cool site, and really make some beautiful citrusy, really bright fruit flavored sparkling wines from that site. So the instance of having some of these cooler vineyard sites in the Eola Amity Hills that is really impacted by the Pacific Ocean, when those ocean storms start to come in mid-September, late September and mid-October, sometimes the Pinot Noir grapes are not quite at the level that some would like to make the best red table wine Pinot Noirs. And so it's a very natural progression into making a Blanc de Noir or a blended Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. There's very little Pinot Meunier planted in the Willamette Valley, although it is increasing. Argyle do have some, only a small amount. Soder has planted a small amount, and so has Flaneur. So there's a few producers that are really trying to focus on developing their sparkling production and really selecting the best clonal material and seeking out the highest elevation and coolest sites, some even north-facing sites, to focus their sparkling traditional method wine production on. In 1997, Soda Brut Rosé was born, or Soda Pop as it's fondly called. Portland native Tony Soter, who had etude in Napa Valley and Carneros, came back to the Willamette Valley and purchased a couple of vineyard sites, one that had a high amount of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That was a cooler site. And he and his wife decided that they would make a Chardonnay dominant Brut Rosé from this site. And this is really what Tony started the Soter foray into sparkling wine. Tony loved having the extended hang time that you would get here in the Pacific Northwest from those cooler, more moderate temperatures that would allow more flavor development to happen in his sparkling wines. And so he really enjoyed playing around and refining that technique for developing true Pinot Noir and true Chardonnay character in their sparkling wines, while still retaining the natural fresh acidity that the cool climates of this growing season gives you. Irie might have been the first to plant Pinot Meunier. They still make a single varietal Pinot Meunier, but I don't believe they make it sparkling unless it's a pet nat. 1999 was the next foray into some sparkling wine development here in the Willamette Valley with Elk Cove making their first Blanc de Noir. Again, a cooler vintage and some young vines. Elk Cove really played around with trying to perfect the Blanc de Noir, although they only released, the 1999 was their first and only release again until 2011 when they released their Pinot Noir Rosé, and then they've released some ever since. The vintages from 2010, 2011, 2012, there was a real boom in traditional method sparkling wine production in the Willamette Valley and in Oregon, mostly because of the coolness of these three vintages. They were all quite late, and it was a real chance for people to hang the fruit, get some really great hang time, develop the flavors, but the natural, bright, really aggressive acidity of those very late seasons was just an ideal opportunity for these winemakers to really feel like they could make a premium sparkling wine. The investment into sparkling wine is not to be done lightly. It is very expensive, in comparison to making a regular table wine. And so when, people go into it, they have to really consider how are they going to be moving forward with this? Will it be just a single vintage release, or are they really going to invest in it? Andrew Davis of Radiant Sparkling Wine, who gave me a lot of my information for this seminar as well, really saw that there was a genuine interest in growing the sparkling wine category in the Willamette Valley and in Oregon at large. And Andrew was a winemaker who originally was at Argyle, but really felt this need and desire to start his own small facility in McMinnville to serve the needs of small Oregon producers who couldn't necessarily afford to purchase all of the additional equipment that sparkling wine requires of you. In 2014, really a huge growth. So he started with just around a dozen clients, and within just one decade, really less than a decade, he has grown to having 47 client partners for his sparkling wine facility. He's pretty much at capacity, and all of the sparkling wine producers within his facility continue to expand. So there's definitely a lot of success that he's having with sparkling wine development in the Willamette Valley, and really helping the industry to understand the different styles that can be made, the different tirage methods, the different all of the great immense expense that sparkling wine takes, and the different approaches in terms of the fineness of the winemaking that needs to happen for these sparkling wines to be really pure and really high quality, like the rest of the wines that come out of the Willamette Valley. So he's been a great asset to building this this product in Oregon. He makes wines, or helps those make wine, from the Columbia Gorge all the way down to the Rogue Valley. Anna Lemmer is one of his clients, and most are still using Pinot Noir or Chardonnay for their traditional method sparkling wine production. Dosage trials are really important, and in the last several Oregon symposiums, there's been a real focus on the industry's attention to understanding different sparkling wine methods. So also in 2012 and to 2014, there was another sparkling boom happening at a much smaller level, and with mostly the more small producers and the natural focused producers and biodynamic and organic focused producers in the state, who don't like to intervene too much in the winemaking process. So Pétillant Naturel evolution was also happening in the early teens of the 2000s, with Pet Nat being the single fermentation in bottle. It really is a raw product that's very full and complex, but doesn't have any of the refinement or aging that happens under the traditional method style. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So that was in the early teens. And then, of course, the canned Oregon tradition took off. And so Underwood were one of the first to really focus on canning wines. And the bubbles came with that. So carbonated or tank method fermentations under pressure were bottled into cans, and that's really taken off. And Nielsen data, I think in 2018, reported a 50% rise in Oregon sparkling wine sales. And so much of that can be attributed to the sparkling wine cans, as well as a national understanding and interest in what the likes of Argyle and other producers were doing at the time. NME, with Thomas Hausman sitting down there inside his press on the right-hand side of your screen, being another huge proponent for premium quality sparkling wine, and really working with Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir, Blanc de Noirs, and Rosés to really focus on creating high quality, premium styled rosé traditional method sparkling. It was also NME that started the first Bubbles Fest in 2016 as well. And that's a 2-day event that then has an additional technical tasting for winemakers. So really sharing that collegiate knowledge sharing that the Willamette Valley is really so well known for, and Oregon is so well known for, and helping to really bring forward the sparkling movement and the quality of the sparkling movement together as a united front here in the Willamette Valley.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Dracaena Wines loves to give back. There are so many fur babies that deserve to find their forever home. We would love to be able to help as many as possible. If you are part of a nonprofit organization or know of a nonprofit organization that would like to hold a fundraiser, please contact us at contact@dracaenawines.com or visit our website, dracaenawines.com, to fill out the form. How does the fundraiser work? It is super simple and costs your group absolutely nothing. Together, we will choose a month that your group will be sponsored. During the month, you promote the fundraiser just like any other event you'd hold. At the end of the month, we will donate 20% of the sales to your organization. The donations will be made in the name of each individual who purchased the wine so that you know exactly who helped the animals. Our goal is to raise as much funds as we possibly can and to help as many animals as possible. So please help us help as many fur babies as we possibly can.
In 2018, we also had the first sparkling symposium with Peter Leem as keynote, who wrote that wonderful champagne tome. And then again, Willamette Valley's Chemeketa College also introduced into their enology program a deep dive into sparkling wine with a really deep curriculum, and also investment with Andrew Davis into sparkling wine machines as well. So there's four main methods really of making sparkling wine in Oregon that you'll see, and they will vary in price. So traditional method sparkling, where the grapes are intentionally farmed for sparkling production, where in Oregon, we still generally have lower yields for our sparkling wines, whereas in Champagne, they're often getting, up to 6 tons an acre for their sparkling production. In Oregon, it's still pretty standard to have around 3 tons for sparkling production. So traditional method, you make wine intentionally for sparkling, ferment it to dryness, so it'll be a low alcohol wine that you then add sugar and yeast to in the bottle when you bottle, so that you're increasing the alcohol level and having the yeast that you're adding go to work on the sugars that you're adding to the bottle as well. And then it spends the most important part, time on lees, on tirage. So really having that yeast degradation, the amino acids in the yeast really breaking down and creating creamy, nutty, savory, umami characters in the sparkling wine. And generally, those flavors don't start to develop until at least 12 months of autolytic time on the yeast lees. And so many producers here will do extended tirage, not as much as 10 years as Argyle does for their prestige cuvee, but generally between 15 months and 3 years. So really generally following those standard traditional champagne time frames for a vintage sparkling traditional method wine. So after tirage, that's when they decide if a dosage is required. Many of the Willamette Valley's wines are very low dosage or zero dosage. And again, because of the low yields of the fruit, there's quite a lot of flavor to the grapes, and really not wanting to mask anything with adding additional sugar to the cuvee, unless it really does enhance the character, the high quality character. And then tank method. So this is for generally larger production sparkling wines. Tank method, again, you're pressing the juice, fermenting it in tank with yeast, but really bottling it under pressure. So making sure that it's in a tank that has a pressure valve that's going to keep in all of that CO2. As we know from general winemaking, that the yeast and sugar create heat and create CO2. And generally we would have release valves on our tank that would allow that CO2 to expand and escape. But with tank method, we're going to keep those valves closed or shut off, and really, or use specialized tanks before we filter, add a dosage, and then bottle the sparkling wine. Charmat or tank method are often used for aromatic varieties. So you'll often find Riesling or Muscat, sometimes Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer made in the tank method format. And sometimes they will also have residual sugar as well. So either arresting the fermentation and filtering out the yeast to leave a lower alcohol, slightly sweeter, fruitier style of sparkling, or they'll have a dosage added before bottling as well. And then ancestral method or pétillant naturel or pétnat is made as in general the same way as you would make a still wine. However, you monitor the brix level as the alcohol is increasing just before you have less than 5 grams of sugar left. What you want to do is then cool the wine down, chill it down, and you can filter it, but then you're removing the yeast. What you really want to do is rack it a couple of times for clarity, and then take those yeast and the residual sugar that's still left in the wine, that 5 grams, and bottle it at that point. Those yeast are going to continue to work on those remaining sugars in the bottle, and this will create a sparkling wine. It won't be of the same intensity and same pressure as a traditional method sparkling wine that are usually around 6 or 7 atmospheres. It'll generally be around 3 or 4. So a lot more of a gentle foam in your mouth. And then the final method is carbonation. So really just pumping air into the wine to create carbonation. So you can make your traditional rosé, you can pick it for sparkling production, make a traditional rosé, ferment it to dryness, or blanc de blanc or blanc de noir style, ferment it to dryness. And then at the bottling line, you can inject CO2, carbon dioxide, into the bottle. And that is your carbonated wine. So they're the main 4 methods. And of course, all of these methods are differing levels of time consumption. And as you can imagine, as it takes longer to make traditional method sparkling, there's a lot more investment of time and money. The wines tend to be higher priced. So sparkling ancestral method wines will tend to be around the same price as your more premium table wines. And then within the sparkling wine styles, within the sparkling wine methods, then you have your traditional sparkling wine styles. So the most common in Oregon is really the rosé or the non-vintage style, with Blanc de Blanc and Blanc de Noir becoming increasingly popular. So the non-vintage blend of different grapes, and so primarily Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. Although, as I mentioned earlier, Pinot Meunier is not really of prominence here in the Valley. The blend of grapes generally coming from different years. This is a style that's starting to evolve here, but primarily Willamette Valley does a lot of vintage traditional method sparkling. So really highlighting and taking advantage of the cooler vintages and increasing production in those cooler vintages, and then also having that ability to, where the grapes are ripening at the end of the season and you're starting to get flavor development, you're able to have much more distinctive vintage character profiles in your sparkling wines. So one of the reasons that Oregon is really starting to become such a haven for great sparkling wine producers and great sparkling wine styles is that ripening at the end of the season, very high quality farming practices, and the ability to get a lot of varietal character and depth of character within the high, crisp, natural acidity that's required of a sparkling wine. Blanc de Blanc is really on the rise with the increased plantings of Chardonnay as well. And Blanc de Noir is probably the highest production of that style as well. So Pinot Noir being so prevalent, it makes a lot of sense to be making a Blanc de Noir style that has all of the savory and red fruited exuberance that Pinot Noir tends to give you. Rosés are also popular, but these are more so popular with the tank method and carbonation styles or pet nat styles of wine, and not so much in the traditional method at the moment, but it is growing. The prestige cuvee style is the highest of the premium category in that producer's range, and for an example of that would be Argyle's 10-year extended tirage. So this has really gained such great attention for the Willamette Valley and for what sparkling wine is capable of here. It's such a dedication to lay down a wine for 10 years in the cellar and then finally release it. It's such a great celebration, and the wine is incredibly complex and incredibly long-lived. It has the finest bead of a sparkling because of that really extended time on lees. It's got the really typical creamy mid palate and bright fruit that Oregon sparklings are known for. However, it's really developing into more of the nutty characters and rounded fruit flavors that come with time aged wine in bottle. And then there's an example of Little Barnett, their Blanc de Noir, which is made by Andrew Davis. This is he's a partner in this company, and it's a company that's really focused entirely on sparkling wine production. So they've made a real commitment to just focusing on sparkling wine, and the belief that sparkling wine in the Willamette Valley is excellent. So additional considerations for style within the traditional method. So getting elegance through early picking to keep that natural bright acidity. Keeping yields fairly low still to really retain the flavor development of the varieties. And this is going to really depend on the winemaker styles. There are some winemakers who want almost flavorless grapes for their sparkling production, and they want all of the flavor development to come through time on lees. So that extended tirage from 12 to 36 months being the most common, and then vintage conditions, vintage character, also the other traits that winemakers are looking for, being that vintage sparklings are what the Willamette Valley mostly creates at the moment in terms of their production sizes. Obviously, the grape varieties that we grow here in the Willamette Valley and have high production of are really suited to making premium quality sparkling wine. And then we can continue to expand the category and expand the growth of the category by moving into those higher, cooler elevation sites that are becoming available, and also moving closer to the coast as well, where the acidity and the freshness remains very high. In Southern Oregon, they have naturally high elevations, and there are some beautiful traditional method sparkling wine companies in Southern Oregon, Irvine and Roberts being one of them, who focus on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay at their high elevation site in the Rogue Valley. That's on really well-drained sandstone soils, and they get very, very creamy, very intense citrus characters from their high elevation site as well. In the gorge, that wind and again high elevation from the mountains that are present in the gorge really allow for some aromatic cool climate styles as well. So again, Blanc de Noir being prominent in the gorge, and Analemma makes probably the most famed sparkling in the gorge, but it was really the Pines who started making sparkling wine in the gorge as well, around the same time, that 2012 time, when everyone else had that cool vintage as well, and really started to focus on understanding what sparkling wine could be in Oregon. So good question about, aside from style, are producers required to indicate dosage levels on the label? They are not required because there is not generally a requirement. However, most for national US sparkling wine. However, most do stick to the traditional brut, extra brut, zero dosage styles. So brut would be anything from 0 to 14 grams of residual sugar, and extra brut, half of that again. So really sticking to the traditional champagne styles there. And then David has a question: given the preference by consumers and possibly vintners for it, to what extent, if any, has Chardonnay supplanted Pinot Gris in statewide plantings as producers focus upon and sales of your bubblies and still Chard have increased? Yes, that's a great question, David. We're still, I think we will really start to see the actual numbers in the growth of Chardonnay, because there has been an immense amount of plantings of Chardonnay in the last few years, but they've only just started coming into production. And the way that our data collection works is that we report off of collected tonnage, so tonnage that is turned into wine. So I would expect that within the next 12 to 36 months that we're going to see Chardonnay overtake Pinot Gris as the I guess white-ish style of wine, given that Pinot Gris are pink-skinned grape. To my knowledge, there hasn't been too many plantings of Pinot Gris, if any, in the Willamette Valley in the last 5 years, maybe even 10 years. But there is still a lot of Pinot Gris being planted in the Umpqua Valley, for instance, and also some in the Rogue as well. But I do think that Chardonnay is on the cusp of taking over Pinot Gris as Oregon's white grape variety, which is maybe a little sad, but also exciting because I love Chardonnay as well. So I'm happy to see all of the great new Chardonnays being created. And then considerations for style of pet nat. So as you can see, pet nats are generally going to be a little cloudy. They're not fined and filtered. They're definitely more raw and rustic and youthful than most traditional method sparkling wines are going to be. And that's part of their fun. It's like, I think it was Brienne Day who said it's, the difference between going to the symphony and going to a rock concert is the difference between sparkling, traditional method sparkling wine and pet nat. And I love that, that analogy, because it's just so true. You just have this mouthful of wild, frothy fruit in your mouth with pet nat. And it's such a fun style to make, and it can be made from pretty much any grape variety in the state as well. So everything from Dolcetto to Vermentino to Zinfandel to Zabibo, Cabernet Franc, Gamay, Pinot Noir, of course, can really be, captured in this vibrant, unfiltered, raw wine style. And I think, it's really becoming pretty fashionable within the younger community and the younger winemakers who maybe can't afford to, put away so much wine and money in holding a wine back for 3 to 6 years. That's a lot of cash flow to hold on to. So we're really seeing a lot of fun pet nats coming out of younger winemakers or younger brands who want to have a bubbly because they're fun and delicious, but aren't able to, do a held back cellared release. And that's perfect for the pet nat whole, where you can just do small production, generally less than 100 cases. It's generally done by hand. So you need to have a small team on hand or have your friends help. And then you get some really delicious wines coming out of that. So really capturing the last of that fermentation and fermenting sugars, and traditionally not disgorged, not topped up, and having a little haze in the bottle. And then considerations for carbonation or tank method, and canned wine styles. So the funny thing about Oregon is that you know, people often think that canned wine is going to be lesser quality wine, but in Oregon, it's generally the same wine that they're going to be putting in bottles. So it's the canned wines are as high quality as the bottled wines, and they don't really differentiate in terms of what they're, you know, the quality level that they're putting in a can versus what they're putting in a bottle. And they often do have both available. For instance, the A to Z Bubbles is available in both the bottle, which it looks so pretty, but also available in the can as well. And carbonated wines are generally going to be pretty clean and crisp, and the bubbles are going to be pretty aggressive and foamy in your palates. They're definitely convenient for cans and pretty unpretentious. And they're often going to have a lot more fruit flavor to them. So a lot more bright, ripe fruit flavor, especially more than a traditional method sparkling. Pet nuts are going to have more of that yeasty, just finished fermentation flavor than a lot of the canned wine styles, because these have been fermented to dryness, and so have had time to rest as a dry wine before they're being put through the bottler and carbonated. So really suited to a lot of different grape varieties, canning and tank method production, and can have just a lot of exuberant fruit flavors, sometimes a little sweetness as well. And yeah, beautiful, really beautiful fruit flavors. And again, yeah, unpretentious, easy to drink, and great for taking on a hike. Just a beautiful view of Temperance Hill Vineyard, which is one of the vineyards that is obviously very well known for a single vineyard estate, but also increasing their Chardonnay production as well. And then here are some sustainability logos that you might see on some of the Oregon wines that are around. So Live Certified, it stands for Low Input Viticulture and Enology. It's the largest certification here in Oregon for wines, and you see it across many wine brands, and it's really again that local, really collegiate group getting together, sharing information, sharing best practices for sustainable farming practices, really limiting inputs in the vineyard and in the winery, and really trying to do better. Then there's the organic and regenerative organic movement. So there's USDA, Oregon Tilth, and the ROC now, organic regenerative certification. Demeter biodynamic certification, mostly for vineyards and fruit here. Just a few wineries have the biodynamic certification for their cellars. And then there's B Corp certified, of which Oregon has the largest amount of B Corp certification wineries in the world, which mean that the employees of the company are really shareholders in the company as well. And so it's more of an equitable certification as well as a sustainable certification. And then DRC, the Dry Roots Coalition. So those who forego irrigations in their vineyards. And then finally, Salmon Safe, which is usually linked to Live and is a program through the USDA in Oregon or ODA that really helps protect and limits the inputs in the vineyards so that we're not polluting the creeks and rivers that the runoff from all of our rainwater goes into the streams and impacts spawning salmon habitat. And then growing consumer demand for Oregon wine. I think we just saw through all of the work that Oregon winemakers do in their cellar and in their vineyard. The average bottle price is higher for Oregon wine because of the fact that we don't have irrigation. We can't pump up the volumes of the fruit. We have hand harvesting, and most of our wineries are quite small. About 70% are under 5,000 cases. So small production, hand-picked fruit, really working to make the best product possible. And everyone agrees it's worth it. Tanat, yes, Tanat, definitely. As a pet nat, Troon's Tanat is fantastic as a pet nat. And then a question, are pet nuts typically indigenous yeast or inoculated? I would say that they're typically indigenous yeasts in the pet nuts, simply because they're mostly falling in line with those producers who are looking to make wine that way. So the more organic and natural, minimal intervention producers. Of course, if you do have low yams, then you will need to either give your yeast some help or add an inoculant to make sure that they get through to that sparkling stage. Yes, there are plenty of CO2 injected wines. I believe there are wines that Dobbs makes. There's plenty of available canned wines that are CO2, and it's really a growing category because it's just so easy then and reliable to have bubbles at a lower cost of production. So there's I think the Laris sparkling wine is CO2. I believe the A to Z bubbles is CO2 injected. So there's quite a few. But yeah, they make delicious wines at just a more affordable price point, and larger volumes are able to do as well. Great questions, everyone. Thank you.
Appreciate everybody's time today and look forward to hosting more of these as we move closer to May. Bree, thank you. With that, I think we're going to adjourn today's webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Send in any questions you have, and I'll hopefully see you in the next webinar.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt-Butt. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com and sign up for my newsletter at exploringthewineglass.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Podcast music is Wine by Kevins. Until next week, slancha.
Never let you go. No, never let you go. I want it like glass right now. I'm on TV for my 10,000 tell you. There is always time for a good glass of wine. No, never let you go. No, never let you go. A nice glass right now.